Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well, having a good Thursday. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today, so let's get straight into the news stories and let's talk a little bit about WrestleMania because, of course, the Royal Rumble is about, 10 days away. It's nearly WrestleMania season and we're getting more and more information when it comes to the plans for WrestleMania 37. We now know, of course, it's going to be taking place in Raymond James Stadium in Tampa Bay, Florida, instead of SoFi Stadium in California. But we have some more updates now when it comes to the broadcast plans, fans in attendance. Fans are going to be there. It's very, very interesting. So let's get into the broadcast plans first, because the current plan, of course, is to have WrestleMania 37 across 2 nights as it was last year. And the current plan is to have WWE WrestleMania 37 event for each night to be a 3-hour show, airing live on the WWE Network from 7 to 10 Eastern Time. There will also likely be a kickoff pre-show that airs before the pay-per-view broadcast at 7 p.m. This is according to a report from PW Insider. It was also noted that everything is subject to change at this point, apart from the dates and location, but I guess, look, like if anything taught us from 2020, anything's possible. Now, regarding the rest of the WrestleMania 37 weekend, nothing else has been locked in as of yet, but there has been talk of holding the WWE Hall of Fame as a virtual event, although that's not been confirmed. So when it comes to the 3-hour element for each night, I think that works. It was the same as last year. So essentially this report is it's going to be the same as last year in terms of the format and the timing, which is fine. I think that's what everyone's wanted. Even when we go back to whatever the new normal is when it comes to WrestleMania, I really don't want to sit through another WrestleMania where it's a 6-7 hour show. I love pro wrestling. I love WWE. I love watching pro wrestling, and you know, the cliches, I could watch it all day if I could, but 6 or 7 hours of those WrestleManias, that they are a tough watch. And it almost became to the point of, not that you dreaded WrestleMania because you look forward to it because it's the biggest show of the year, but it got to the point where sometimes those WrestleManias just weren't that enjoyable anymore because they were so long, and it did feel like it was a marathon to sit through it. It really was. Once you get to that 3rd hour or the 4th hour, I mean, WrestleMania was always a 4-hour event. I mean, previously, I know back in the Attitude Era, in that 3 hours, but it evolved to a 4-hour event, and I didn't mind that really. That was still manageable. But once you got to the end of that, even when it was 4 hours, you go, man, this is a long event. And then once it starts to get to 5, 6 hours, you're adding in a 2-hour pre-show and all that kind of stuff. It just felt like, man, the show suffers because of it. Some of the main events that should have been fantastic main events in WrestleMania history died a horrible death because the show was just so long. So I really like the 2-day format, and I like the 3-hour format. And frankly, when we go to AT&T Stadium next year and SoFi Stadium in California the year after, I want it still to be on that 2-day format and having a 3-hour show each time. I think WrestleMania has grown and it has evolved and it has become something bigger and more. It's a festival rather than a show at this point, but like with any festival, you can have it across a couple of days. That doesn't hurt the show as much as having the show as a 6-7 hour event. That's just my opinion when it comes to that. But when it comes to WrestleMania 37 as well, as I mentioned, there's a ton of news coming to it at the moment because it has been announced that WWE is set to have actual fans in attendance at Raymond James Stadium for WrestleMania 37, which of course will take place, as I mentioned, across 2 nights on April 10 and April 11 in Tampa Bay, Florida. Now, as seen yesterday, WWE Chief Brand Officer Stephanie McMahon spoke with TMZ Sports this week and said that the current plan is to have fans in attendance in the crowd at WrestleMania 37. This is what she had to say, quote, "I'm thrilled and excited because hopefully this will be the first opportunity for us to have our fans back in attendance. That's the current plan. Of course, ticket information is not available yet because we're still trying to figure out all the different mechanisms for it all. We're really lucky, though, that the NFL Super Bowl is our lead-in this year for Raymond James Stadium, so we're going to learn a lot from them logistically, etc., and really best practices, what works, what doesn't work. But man, we can't wait to come in and have 2 nights, hopefully really rock that pirate ship." Now, Stephanie later reiterated that the current plan is to have fans at Raymond James Stadium. She was asked how they will determine if they go forward with that plan and how the COVID-19 pandemic affects things. She says, quote, "I mean, pretty much it really is working with the local organizing committee and all of the health professionals. Health and safety is first and foremost, of course." Tell your own company that in June last year. For our fans, for our performers, for the employees, for the staff working in the building, there's a lot of different logistics that need to be determined, but hopefully it will all work out, and this will be the first WWE event where we actually bring the WWE Universe back together in person, and I cannot wait. Now, Stephanie was later asked if WWE knows how many fans they want to try and bring to Raymond James Stadium for the event. She said they do have a plan, but she wouldn't announce it just yet. We'll touch on that in a second because that plan has subsequently been reported or at least speculated on. But WWE Champion Drew McIntyre also confirmed that there would be this limited crowd in attendance for the big events in April. This was in an interview with Fox 13 in Tampa. McIntyre talked about why WrestleMania 36 was disappointing to him, as he hoped to win the WWE Championship from Brock Lesnar in front of 90,000 people before the pandemic forced the event to move to the closed-set WWE Performance Center. He then confirmed that tickets for WrestleMania 37 will be announced soon. He said, quote, "Last year was very disappointing for me personally, Tampa's my American hometown. I've spent 13 years here. I was in the main event fighting for the WWE title, supposed to be 90,000 people there, and we did it in front of nobody in the Performance Center, but I'm very proud of it. We gave the world an escape during the most difficult of times, but I was so excited to find out we get a take two this year at Raymond James Stadium." So, what everyone expected fans to be back at the event for WrestleMania this year. We'll touch on how many fans in a second, but I think most people expected fans to be back. Especially when, look, and again, this is just my opinion, I stress that, I'm no medical professional, I try and listen to the medical professionals on the news and in publications, all that kind of stuff. Even fans being back in April, I just still have my reservations about, because it kind of gives the impression that everything's back to normal and the pandemic's gone away and all that kind of stuff, and it hasn't. Personally, over here in the UK, it's arguably worse than it's ever been. And I don't know the full situation when it comes to the United States, but it is concerning. It is very concerning. And I mention this all the time. Would you realistically want to go to a sporting event, an entertainment event during a pandemic? Would you want to take that risk? And I've mentioned this before on the channel, and some people say, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I wouldn't. If it's socially distanced, if I feel safe. But my always issue of anything like that, even when I go outside and go on a walk, or I go to the shop to get groceries or whatever you want to call it, my concern isn't myself. My concern is other people. I'm taking it seriously. Are they taking it seriously? Are they, using hand sanitizers? Are they socially distancing? Sometimes I see people, they're not wearing their mask. And that's the stuff that concerns me. So would I feel safe going to an event that WWE or a Premier League match over here in the UK, or a concert, whatever? I just don't know. Even in April, and I know things can change, and I know things will change. Last year taught us that anything can change at any moment. I just think there's so much uncertainty about it. I mean, we always expected fans to be back. I think the goalposts have been moved back when it comes to WWE, when it comes to, go back to SummerSlam. Oh, we want fans back for SummerSlam last year. How ridiculous was that, looking back on it now? They won it at SummerSlam, they won it at the Royal Rumble, now they won it at WrestleMania. But this feels like the first time WWE has openly said, this is what we want. So I think regardless, they're going to probably have fans back. But then the discussion becomes, how many fans? Wow. WWE is reportedly planning 25,000 fans to attend both nights of WrestleMania 37 at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida. Now, as I mentioned just a minute ago, WWE's Chief Brand Officer Stephanie McMahon has revealed that the current plan is for live fans to be in the crowd for WrestleMania 37. WWE Champion Drew McIntyre, as we just talked there, has also confirmed the plan, but WrestleVotes on Twitter, of course very reputable in terms of breaking stories, insider information, scoops, whatever you want to call it, they're very reputable. They have a very strong track record when it comes to stuff like this. They were talking about moving to Raymond James Stadium way back in September and December, and then look, it's happened. It got announced the last week or so. So they are reporting that WWE is planning on allowing upwards of 25,000 fans for each night. So possibly a combined total of 50,000 fans across 2 nights. WWE, of course, will then have to decide on what they want to do after the grandest stage of them all. It was noted in this report by WrestleVotes that some people within WWE would like a soft reopening of the WWE touring schedule for live TV tapings, as continuing with the Thunderdome setup after WrestleMania would come with some location-related headaches due to seasons for Major League Baseball and the NBA, etc. But there's still no confirmation that WWE will resume their touring schedule after WrestleMania, of course, as this pandemic continues. So there is so much to break down there. First of all, 25,000 fans. Now, I mentioned it a second ago. I always felt that fans probably would come back at WrestleMania. Why? Because that's their biggest show of the year. If you do look at other sporting events across the United States and the world, they do have a situation, the NFL are doing it, where they have a limited amount of fans in the arena, whether it's NFL games or whatever. They have a situation where they say, look, we've got an open air stadium, they can hold 50, 60, 70,000 people, we can allow in there 10%, so 7,000 people, or we can allow in 15%, so 10,000, or whatever. They can do that, and they have done that, and there's been relative success for that. You look at the Buffalo Bills, they had a situation, and I think the UFC did it with their fights recently, where you have to do a negative COVID test at least 48 hours prior to entering the arena. To me, that is still iffy, because just because you tested negative on one day doesn't mean the very next day you won't test positive. So even to me, that is slightly suspect. But I always thought fans were going to be back in the stadium for WrestleMania. When I saw the number was 25,000, I was shocked. That's a lot. That is a lot. Now, it's not too. Let's assume, and it probably isn't going to be the case, but let's assume that the fans that attend night 1 won't be the same fans that attend night 2, because WWE want to sell as many tickets as possible. If you have a potential group of 50,000 people in that stadium across 2 nights, that is very alarming. That is very, very alarming. 25,000 fans at any point in a pandemic, at its peak or at its low point, that's a lot. That is a lot. And look, I mean, Raymond James Stadium, how much can that hold? 60, 70,000? It's way more than 10%. It's way more than 20%. I mean, 25,000 fans is a lot. And you can just already hear the reports coming out in May and June, can't you? WrestleMania 37 was a super spreader event. It caused massive spikes of positive COVID tests in the Florida area and all that kind of stuff. And it's concerning. That is really concerning for me. And I know WWE wants fans back. We all want fans back. But that is a pandemic haven for spreading, and just terrible things could happen coming from that. Terrible things could happen from that. So 25,000, I was stunned. Now, that's not to say that they will, but I mean, if WrestleVotes is reporting it, and if that is accurate, then that's incredibly alarming. Now, that's why they stayed in the state of Florida as well, because of course the state of Florida said months and months ago at this point, they said, look, sports teams, anyone that runs stadium events, have as many fans as you want in the arenas and in stadiums, which everyone rightfully so went, that is insane. That is crazy. That is not what to do during a pandemic, but that's what they're doing. So ultimately, if WWE wants to have that many fans, they can. I would wonder if 25,000 fans will buy a ticket, but I mean it's crazy. It's crazy. That to me just seems an astronomical number for a pandemic. It really does. So that's alarming. And to touch on what was also reported there about a live event schedule going to a soft reopening, again, my response to that would be, who would want to go? I mean, state to state? I mean, if they're going to travel state to state and do this soft relaunch of live events, I mean, they're going to have to deal with the local state medical and health authorities in each state, and every single one of those is different. So not just the headache of being able to travel and the talent not feeling comfortable and the fans, then they have to deal with the medical boards, the health and safety authorities. That to me just doesn't seem feasible right now. It really just doesn't seem feasible, and I just can't see that happening. And to me, it doesn't seem like that would be a possibility. But I mean, you never know. I mean, it's WWE, but that number, like I said, 25,000 just seems, I mean, astronomical, absolutely astronomical. And live events, we're in January right now, and I know, again, things can change in 2-3 months' time, and there's the vaccine and all that kind of stuff. Again, my response to that would be, yeah, but how many times have we said, in a couple of months things can change? And then a couple of months go by and nothing really does change. We've been saying the same thing for 12 months nearly at this point. Oh, things will change in a couple of months' time. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. Oh, this will be great when we go back to normal. What is even normal anymore? So that number to me just seemed, massive. Massive. That just seemed, like I said, an astronomical number to me. And I was shocked to see it. I really was shocked to see that number. Let's move on and talk about NXT though, because last night saw the Fight Pit number 2 on WWE NXT, and Timothy Thatcher came out victorious from it. Now, this week's WWE NXT episode on the USA Network, of course, was headlined by the Fight Pit 2 bout. Last night's main event saw Timothy Thatcher defeat Tommaso Ciampa inside the Fight Pit structure. Thatcher won by submission, making Ciampa tap out with a modified stretch muffler in the corner of the cage. Thatcher is now, of course, undefeated in the NXT Fight Pit. He defeated Riddle in the original Fight Pit match on May 27 of last year. That match featured WWE Hall of Famer Kurt Angle as a special guest referee, but tonight's match did not have a guest official. There's no word on yet if WWE is going to continue with the Ciampa-Thatcher feud, which has gone on for a few months now in NXT, but this week's edition of NXT went off the air with somewhat of a show of respect from Thatcher to Ciampa, leading to some people say potentially we could see a tag team form between them. That certainly would be a lot of fun. I know some people said, oh, this might mean that Tommaso Ciampa, he's finished up with NXT and he's going to go to the main roster. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Tommaso Ciampa, if you've seen any interviews with him, he has been firmly against that being a possibility. So I really don't see Tommaso Ciampa going to the main roster or anything like that. He mentioned before that, frankly, his body can't handle it. Now, that was pre-pandemic. Now, being on NXT is exactly the same as being on Raw or SmackDown in terms of the live dates, but that could obviously change in the future. I don't see Ciampa moving to Raw or SmackDown. I would be very surprised to see that. I could see him appearing at the Royal Rumble in 10 days' time. That's a possibility. In terms of the match last night, I mean, I love the Fight Pit. I think it's a fantastic look. It's obviously a play on the Lion's Den with Ken Shamrock in the Attitude Era and that kind of deal. I think it's great. And I think it's a great... I like gimmick matches that are specific for people. Like I said, with the Lion's Den, that was a Ken Shamrock match. All that kind of stuff. I love that kind of deal. And it looks like Timothy Thatcher, the Fight Pit's his deal. I love it. I think it's fantastic. So I enjoyed the match, enjoyed the physicality. Timothy Thatcher is one of my favourites in NXT. I think he's so unique and so different. So big fan of that and a big fan of that match. Speaking of NXT, we have some tag teams advancing in the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic last night, because the first round of the 2021 NXT Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic continued during last night's NXT episode on the USA Network. Last night's show saw 2 first-round matches. Kushida and Leon Ruff, surprisingly, I thought, defeat The Way, which of course is Austin Theory and NXT North American Champion Johnny Gargano. Really surprised by that one. I mean, The Way have been heavily featured on NXT TV, so was shocked to see that. Maybe Kushida and Leon Ruff are going to be that team that actually goes a little bit further. And then another surprise victory, I thought, in that the Lucha House Party, which is Gran Metalik and Lince Dorado, defeated Imperium, former NXT Tag Team Champions. Now, I know me saying that's a surprise might lead to some people saying, well, they are on the main roster, they're on Raw, but I mean, they're hardly featured in. I mean, Imperium, over the last year, they were the NXT Tag Team Champions. So, found that very surprising, but enjoyed all of the tag team matches nevertheless. Now, Ruff and Kushida will now face the Grizzled Young Veterans, who I think are one of the dark horses to win the whole thing, in the quarterfinals. The Lucha House Party will face Legado del Fantasma, which is Joaquin Wilde and Raul Mendoza, in the quarterfinals. The first round of the Men's Dusty Classic was scheduled to wrap on Friday's edition of 205 Live on the WWE Network, with Ashante Adonis and Desmond Troy versus Tony Nese and Aria Davari. However, it's been announced that Adonis is not medically cleared to compete after he was injured during a squash loss to Karrion Kross on last night's edition of NXT. Now, there's no word on yet who will replace Adonis in the tournament, but if we hear anything, of course, we'll talk about it here on the channel. The Men's Dusty Classic quarterfinals will begin next Wednesday on NXT with MSK versus Drake Maverick and Killian Dane, plus the Grizzled Young Veterans versus Ruff and Kushida. The other quarterfinals, a match for an upcoming episode, will see the Undisputed Era, which is Adam Cole and Roderick Strong, face the winners of Nese and Davari versus Troy and Adonis' replacement. I don't know if Adonis' replacement is going to be anyone particularly special or over the top. I think it's just likely as a hook to try and get people to tune in for 205 Live on Friday. Again, I don't know the numbers to watch 205 Live. I can't imagine they're ridiculously high. So I think it's just it's an attempt from WWE and NXT to say, yeah, watch 205 Live on Friday. I would be stunned if it's some giant name, some big NXT name, but you never know. You never know. So that's the situation for the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic. Speaking of NXT, we have some matches announced for next week's edition of NXT. 5 big matches have been announced for next week's episode on the USA Network. The main event for next Wednesday will see NXT champion Finn Balor team up up with his former opponent Kyle O'Reilly to face off against the NXT Tag Team Champions Oney Lorcan and Danny Burch in a non-title match. The match was made after Finn Balor went to NXT General Manager William Regal and asked for a match against Lorcan and Burch so he can take them out before his upcoming title defense against Pete Dunne. Now, Regal told him to find a partner and the match would be made, which led to Balor calling on O'Reilly to join him. Now, next week's NXT show will also see Kurt Stallion finally get his NXT Cruiserweight Championship opportunity against Santos Escobar. Stallion won a fatal 5-way on 205 Live back in November to become the new number one contender to Escobar. The match was finally made after a segment on tonight's show, which saw Escobar taunt Lucha House Party ahead of their upcoming Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic quarterfinals match against Mendoza and Wilde. Lucha House Party hit the ring, but were triple teamed until Stallion made the save. Legado del Fantasma later interrupted Stallion and Lucha House Party during a backstage segment, as Escobar promised to expose Stallion as a rookie and embarrass him next week with the title on the line. So, when it comes to the Cruiserweight division in NXT, it's a weird one. I think there's so much promise there, and I'm a huge fan of Santos Escobar. It just feels like he doesn't have the stars to compete with him there, which is a shame. I wouldn't be shocked. I would not be shocked, and this might sound crazy, that they switch the title next week. Why would you say that? Well, they did the same thing with Leon Ruff when it comes to the NXT North American Championship. And it was a short title reign, of course, but I think it was an attempt by NXT and Triple H and co., the brain trust there for NXT. I think it was an attempt to, let's put the title on him, let's do something that's shocking and surprising, and we can make someone, and then suddenly that's a name on the roster. And I think that was the case there, because that's obviously, he dropped the title very quickly, but now we all know who Leon Ruff is. Would they do it again with a title just a couple of weeks later or a couple of months later? I don't know. That seems to me like a trick. If you've done it once, that's it. But who knows? But I wouldn't be shocked. I really wouldn't be shocked if that's what they did. Speaking of NXT as well, the NXT Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic begun last night. The first round of the first ever NXT Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic kicked off on last night's NXT episode. The tournament opened with WWE Hall of Famer Beth Phoenix and NXT General Manager William Regal on the show with all 8 participating tag teams and the Women's Dusty Classic trophy. Beth Phoenix talked about how NXT has been at the forefront of the women's evolution as images displayed several main roster superstars who have come through the black and yellow brand. Phoenix then introduced Mercedes Martinez, Toni Storm, Kaden Carter, and Kacy Catanzaro for a face-off. This week's show also marked Beth Phoenix's return to calling the action live from ringside at the Capitol Wrestling Center at the WWE Performance Center with Vic Joseph and Wade Barrett. Of course, Beth Phoenix has worked commentary remotely since the COVID-19 pandemic hit last year. Now, tonight's first round match saw Team Ninja, which is Carter and Catanzaro, defeat Storm and Martinez to advance to the quarterfinals, which I think was quite surprising. I think a lot of people, when they see Toni Storm and Mercedes Martinez as a team, you go, they're going to go through. They're going to go all the way, frankly. So for the fact that Team Ninja got the victory was surprising, but I like it because they're a genuine tag team. They've got a team name. They're going to obviously have matching gear. That's what you need to do. This is why I mentioned before the importance of the Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic is to help seed tag teams to actually fill out this women's tag team division in WWE, which they've abandoned ever since the titles were introduced. Get some real tag teams in there. Team Ninja, love it, because they're an actual real tag team. So I think that's fantastic. Now, the match saw interference from NXT Women's Champion Io Shirai, who took out Martinez and allowed Team Ninja to double Team Storm. Team Ninja will now go on to the quarterfinals to face the winners of Aaliyah and Jessie Camilla versus Dakota Kai and Raquel Gonzalez, who also have to be strong favourites for the tournament. The first round match will air next Wednesday night on NXT. So, as I mentioned before, it's just, I think the whole Women's Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic is fantastic, not only because they deserve equal footing, but also because this is how you improve that women's tag team division in WWE. And hopefully it leads to more women's tag team championship appearances in NXT, because I think that's a real fun way to get main roster stars on NXT most weeks. Of course, at the moment they're being kept separate because of the pandemic, but once we move forward from that, I think that's something that NXT does really need to leverage. You know, use what you can. Use what you can. And the Women's Tag Team Division, the Women's Tag Team Championships, every time we've had a interaction, whether it was Sasha Banks and Bayley, once they appeared on NXT, it helped the show in the ratings and in terms of the quality as well. So I was excited to see that start last night. Let's move over to AEW. We have an official tag team of the Inner Circle has been revealed, because in the main event of last night's edition of AEW Dynamite, the Inner Circle had a triple threat tag team match to decide who would be the official tag team of the group. MJF and Chris Jericho ended up defeating the teams of Santana and Ortiz and Jake Hager and Sammy Guevara, with MJF pinning Guevara Jericho and MJF will now continue towards the AEW World Tag Team Championships, currently held by the Young Bucks. Now, I saw some people mocking Chris Jericho. I mean, there's a lot to mock Jericho for, especially over the course of the last 12 months or so. But I saw a lot of people mocking Jericho because he did a lionsault where it didn't look too great. Frankly, he nearly landed on his head. It was actually quite scary because people have legitimately hurt themselves doing it. Basically, what Jericho did is usually he runs, jumps, does the moonsault. He sort of didn't do that. He kind of hopped onto the middle rope and barely hit it. And I saw people criticizing Jericho for that. Oh, he didn't hit a lionsault. He should know when to hang it up. His career's over. Come on. I mean, what? He does the lionsault one. He does it badly once. He needs to retire. Are you kidding me? No, he doesn't. I mean, it's just one. It's one night. If he starts doing it over and over again, it's like the Undertaker with his dive out of the ring. You know, he could do it. WrestleMania, for years in the Attitude Era, but WrestleMania 23 did it against Batista. And then WrestleMania 25 nearly spikes himself, lands on his neck. Then managed to do it, actually, against Triple H at WrestleMania 27. But then every time he tried to do it, you panic because you're going, this guy, he can't do it. He just can't do it. That's when you start going, okay, maybe you need to eliminate that. But Jericho can still do the lionsault. The fact he can still do it when he's 50 years old, it's insane. So I don't know if that's a fair criticism. I think people are looking for a reason to dunk on Chris Jericho right now on social media, which is justified. Not to get too political, but it's justified. I mean, some of the stories when it comes to the pandemic and his political choice have been questionable at best. But I don't think you should dunk on him for the fact that he didn't really botch it. He still landed it, just about. But I mean, there are certainly other things to dunk on him about if you would wish. So I mean, I don't subscribe to that. Speaking of AEW as well, an announcement was made during last night's show that AEW has announced a Women's World Championship Eliminator Tournament to determine the next number one contender to the AEW Women's World Champion Hikaru Shida. The tournament was listed as coming soon, so no entrants have been announced yet. We don't know when it's going to start. Hikaru Shida did mention on her social media as well, as you can see there's the American flag and the Japanese flag. That might give an indication on what kind of talent to expect in it. We could see a Japanese side and an American side, if you will. I don't know if that totally makes sense, considering there are talents from other countries than Japan and the United States. I don't know. That might just be where they're based. I don't know what the logistics are of getting the talent over from Japan as well now. I know it's possible, but it's difficult. So look, if it gives a focus on the AEW Women's Division, that's great. But speaking of this Women's Division in AEW, because you know it's something that I love to talk about, I want to talk about Kenny Omega because he made some comments. Now, Kenny Omega, of course, is heavily involved in the Women's Division. He helps coach them, he helps produce them, helps come up with some of the storylines for him. He's heavily involved. When it comes to the AEW Women's Division, they say, who runs that? Kenny Omega. Now, Kenny Omega isn't the be-all and end-all of the AEW Women's Division. I think he was put there initially because of the relationship he had with Japan. It was a heavily focused Joshi division when AEW first started. Of course, the pandemic changed that, but he's heavily involved in that. So Kenny Omega was talking to Scott Fishbud of TV Insider, and Omega was asked about some of his goals for AEW in 2021 and if the women's division will get more TV time. This is what he said. This is what I really want to talk about here. He said, quote, "I think we are taking baby steps. We have hungry performers who are passionate about getting their chance to do their best. Passion speaks to me more than the performance of a maneuver, and right now our women are really chomping at the bit to get those TV spots. They're all training hard. Our roster keeps getting better. No one has lost their passion. They are still striving for that big goal, which is for the women's division to get more time. I'll have the biggest smile on my face the day we get it. I know we will," end quote. Is someone forgetting they are an EVP here? I mean, it's not like Kenny Omega. He's kind of trying to sort of say, oh, I don't have any influence on the show. Of course you do. You're Kenny by God Omega. You're the AEW World Champion. You're an EVP. You can certainly have a word with the powers that be going, you know that our women's division gets like 5 minutes on the show and it's in the deadest time spot. And we only have one storyline per show. And we've got the other EVP, Cody Rhodes, saying on media calls, oh, they don't really need storylines. Why can't you just have person versus person? Yet his matches do need storylines. And his matches do need to be featured in prime positions. And his matches do need to have multiple segments. It's an infuriating comment. And I don't mean to dunk on Kenny Omega. And I don't mean to say that, oh, this is Kenny Omega's fault. It just comes across as a stupid quote. It just comes across as a massively stupid quote. And I say this time and time again when I talk about the AEW Women's Division. Because there has been tons of criticism to the AEW Women's Division. I've been one of them. I've been heavily critical of it. And it's not because the talent. They have a great roster. They have a fantastic amount of talent in that division. They got Britt Baker, Thunder Rosa, Serena Deeb, Abaddon, Hikaru Shida, Nyla Rose. The list goes on and on. They've got fantastic talent in that division. No one's questioning that, and I think the narrative that, oh, they just don't have the talent for that women's division to succeed, that's so much BS. That is so much BS. The reason the AEW women's division is not succeeding right now, isn't at the level that it should be, is because they don't get the opportunities to succeed. AEW can talk about investing in talent and bringing in talent and doing all of this stuff, throwing money at the solution. You've got to invest in your talent by giving them opportunities. You've got to invest in your talent by giving them TV time. You've got to give them more than a 5-minute match on TV per week. You've got to give them more than just one match. You've got to have multiple matches on the show. You've got to have multiple storylines on the show. You've got to have main events. You've got to have main eventing the TV show. And I don't care about the argument that, well, they've only got 2 hours on TNT every week, they've got to make it count. So by that logic, you're basically saying that the women aren't worthy of that time, or they don't matter. Oh, we've got to get other things over first. It's ridiculous. The argument is ridiculous, and the response I get sometimes as well to that is, well, AEW, they're a young company. They've only been around 18 months or so, sort of 2 years, whatever. And again, I find that narrative as ludicrous. I find it absolutely ludicrous, that narrative. Because look at every other division they have in that company. Everything else they've wanted to succeed, they've made it to succeed. Tag team division. It's the best tag team division in the world. Why? Because they invested heavily in TV time, having excellent matches, giving the matches a long amount of time, having multiple storylines, giving them the opportunities to succeed. It comes down to booking philosophy. When it comes to their booking philosophy, when it comes to women's wrestling, it obviously just isn't an importance. It's not important for them. It's not a priority for them. It's very obvious. It's painfully obvious it's not a priority for them. And then when you have media calls, like they had before Full Gear with Cody Rhodes, and they say, look, Nyla Rose is going to be facing Hikaru Shida at Full Gear, and nothing's really happened on TV for them. The storyline is weak, and they've only had a couple of segments. What's going on there? And then you get a BS response by Cody, who basically says, look, I know you've been conditioned by WWE to assume that everyone sits in catering with this magic camera and you have to have a storyline fighting over the last piece of pie or whatever he said. But basically he implied, look, everything doesn't need a storyline. Every match doesn't need a storyline, which would be fine if all of his matches didn't have a storyline or some of his matches didn't have a storyline. But this is the same guy that everything with Cody Rhodes needs a storyline. Everything needs a grand entrance. Dye his hair. Doesn't dye his hair. Cut on his head. I don't get a world title shot. I've refused myself from a world title shot. I'm going to go off TV for a couple of weeks. Now I'm back. I'm feuding with Shaquille O'Neal. I've got Snoop Dogg. Everything needs a storyline. And it's ridiculous. And again, I don't mean to criticize Cody Rhodes, but again, like that Kenny Omega quote, I think it's a lazy quote, and I think it's a lazy argument. The women in AEW deserve better, and they deserve the platform to get better and prove their worth, but they just don't even get the opportunity. They really don't. So that is infuriating to me. Infuriating to me to hear that argument of Kenny Omega, well, I hope they get TV time, and when they do, I'll be so happy. Why don't you go out and do something about it? Why don't you push for it? Why don't you say to Tony Khan, to Cody Rhodes, whoever's writing that show, why don't you say to them, look, people are slandering us for our women's division, and rightfully so. The arguments and criticisms are more than justified. And I know some of the matches we've seen, they get posted on social media all the time, like, oh, look at this, sloppy, botch. But you don't give them the opportunity. You don't give them the opportunity because they're trying to cram everything into a 5-minute match in the worst time slot ever. And then the response is, well, they don't draw. Well, you put them in the worst time slot. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The booking philosophy when it comes to the AEW's women's division is just backwards. And I know that upsets some people because they're so big AEW fans. I'm a big AEW fan. I'm a fan of pro wrestling. I don't believe in this tribal nature of pro wrestling fandom. You can only like one company and not this company. Or if you like WWE, you hate AEW. If you like AEW, you hate WWE. You're going up against the corporate giant. If you like Impact, you're just a mark because you're a nerd. If you like Ring of Honor, no one knows about Ring of Honor. Or you only like Japan. Those arguments are just so ridiculous. You can like pro wrestling, you can like some elements, you can not like some elements. You can praise what you like, you can critique what you don't like. That's called being a fan and having an opinion. But when I criticize sometimes AEW, the backlash, man, you can't criticize them, blah, blah, blah. Come on. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Anyway, rant over. Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about The Undertaker. The Undertaker was on the Joe Rogan Experience. This was a pleasant surprise. I watched it last night, all nearly 3 hours of it. Certainly a long episode. But The Undertaker was a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience on Spotify. That dropped yesterday. Now, The Undertaker talked about his career with WWE and the current product. Now, Taker mentioned the issues he's had with the current product with Rogan when Joe Rogan asked him if he still follows wrestling nowadays. Now, The Undertaker said it's not something he enjoys to watch because of the way the product has changed over the years. I mean, tell me about it. But The Undertaker says, quote, I try and it's tough right now for me. The product has changed so much and it's kind of, and I'll probably PO a lot of people off, but they need to hear it. It is what it is. To the young guys who think The Undertaker is a bitter old guy, I'm not bitter. I did my time. I walked away when I wanted to walk away. Debatable. I just think the product is a little soft. There's guys here and there that have an edge to them, but there's too many pretty and not enough substance guys, I think, right now, which I agree with him. I agree with him on that. There is too much pretty and no substance, but I don't think it's necessarily their fault. He says one of the big things that happened was that the generation before, we all got old at the same time, so there wasn't enough guys to work with the young guys. You can listen to the fans on the internet, or you can listen to someone who's been there and done it. There was just not enough of the merging of young talent and new talent. When we had Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, we were all working together, and then we all aged out. We aged out, and it left these young guys to learn with more young guys, and the product changed. Taker then gave some props to Triple H for running the Performance Center in NXT for trying to build the new future of wrestling. He said Triple H is trying his best to turn back the clock and build guys with more of an edge. He said, quote, the Performance Center is helping. Again, debatable. We got Triple H who's trying to get some of the toothpaste back in the tube, take a step back and move forward and try and get the product more edge. I think that's what it's missing. There is so much to break down in that in that quote. I do agree with him. Not all the talent has the same edge that they used to. I think a counter argument to that could be they're not allowed to have that edge because they're all told how to walk, how to talk, which turnbuckle to go to, where to pose, when to pose, how long to pose for. And if you go out of that matrix, if you try and do something on your own, you get criticized, you get disciplined, and you get chewed out, and then you're not booked on TV again. So I think that's debatable. I think the part when he talks about Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, Shawn Michaels all aging out is true to a point. It's true to a point. I watch the Attitude Era shows a lot on the WWE Network still too because it's still one of my favourite periods of pro wrestling like it is for many people. And I look at that roster and I always think to this at the time, I go, man, these guys were all young and at the top of their game at the same time. Stone Cold retired when he was like 37, 38. The Rock in the Attitude Era is like 25 years old. Triple H is in his late 20s, early 30s. Shawn Michaels then is even still in his 30s. The Undertaker is in his 30s. All of those stars were in their early 30s. They were in the prime of their careers. Arguably hadn't even hit the prime of their careers during that period of time yet. And then the next generation comes forward and it's like Randy Orton. John Cena, Kurt Angle, and you go, right, they did make stars, Batista, they did make stars for a brief period after that generation, and then WWE stopped creating stars. Why did they stop creating stars during that period of time? Because they panicked. They didn't have a plan. They weren't creating new stars. So what did they do? They kept bringing back the old stars. They kept bringing back a Triple H, a Shawn Michaels, an Undertaker, a Rock, you name it. They kept bringing those names back. They're doing it now. Goldberg. You know, and the criticism is, and it's justified, of, well, the new stars struggled to flourish. When every year at WrestleMania, in those featured spots, you had guys who were legends, and they have earned those spots. And I do understand both sides of the argument, but how can you develop and establish these new stars when, you know, say there's 6 big spots at WrestleMania, 3 big featured matches, if 4 of them are featuring these legends, these part-timers, the guys that are going to be there for 1 or 2 appearances, and the legends and part-timers are going to win every single time. CM Punk mentioned it when he faced The Undertaker. He was like, I didn't have a problem facing The Undertaker, and I didn't have a problem with losing, but it was kind of like, okay, then The Undertaker goes away, so I'm on TV the next day, what do I do? How does that make me look? And then they wonder about, well, we're not building new stars. It's like, well, you build them up to a point, the legend comes back, the legend wins, and then they go back down and they go, I wonder why we can't create new stars. I wonder why we've lost all this momentum. Now, I think at this point, WWE just out of sheer force has had to actually start creating some new stars because the legends physically can't come back to the ring now. So that's why you're creating a Drew McIntyre, Roman Reigns, a Seth Rollins, etc. Because by force they have to. But I don't know if I agree with that argument that, well, the problem was that we all aged out at the same time and then we didn't have anyone, they couldn't work with people. I think the problem was that they did age out and WWE did create stars for a brief period, but then they stopped. And then they had to keep bringing them back. And then whenever someone did catch fire, whenever someone did get over, the new stars came back and then pushed them back down because they had to win that match. That's the issue there. And as far as The Undertaker saying that Triple H is helping, the Performance Center is helping, again, that is debatable. That is very debatable. You can talk about Triple H, oh, it's helping, look at the edge it's bringing back. Well, not in the ratings. Not in the ratings. NXT loses every week to Dynamite when it comes to viewership or rating. Maybe that's just what the modern fan wants to see. People might not like it, but people want to watch AEW far more than they do NXT. So that edge that The Undertaker is looking for, maybe that's just passé. Maybe that's too old school for what the modern crowds want. We used to say the same before the Attitude Era. You don't know what the fans want. They had to evolve. Maybe that's what pro wrestling is evolving to nowadays. We don't like to say it. Some people don't like to say it or admit it, but the ratings don't lie. The buzz doesn't lie. AEW, more people watch it. A younger audience watch it because that's what the younger audience of today wants to see. They don't want to see that old edge from the old school. I like it, but maybe I don't fit into all the people that are going to be watching AEW Dynamite on Wednesdays. That's the issue there. That's the issue there. And as far as the Performance Center helping create those new stars for WWE, again, that's debatable. What was the last big male star that they made out of the Performance Center? I couldn't tell you. Because any big star that's come out there from the male side of things has been on the indie scene beforehand, and once they get up to the main roster, they get changed every way apart from Sunday by Vince McMahon. They change the look, entrance gear, entrance music, the way they talk, the way they walk, their gimmick, they lose their first name, Riddle's now an idiot on television. That's what happens over and over again. So is that working? The Performance Center and NXT have helped establish and build a fantastic women's division in WWE. I'll agree with you there. But is that really helping? Again, it's debatable. So, I mean, I really enjoyed the episode, but I thought those comments by The Undertaker there were certainly debatable. Adam Pearce, I love this story. Adam Pearce, he's tweeted out recently, because there's been a lot of chatter online, hasn't there, about how it's ridiculous at this point that random WWE superstars would just say, I'm declaring my spot for the Royal Rumble match. And everyone goes, what? Whilst at the same time, you've got people like Drew Gulak and Ricochet want to be in the Rumble, and Adam Pearce goes, no, you're going to have to prove yourself. Why can't you just declare yourself like others? Well, Adam Pearce, he's taken to social media, took to Twitter yesterday and addressed these Rumble match declarations. He said, quote, it's actually pretty simple. Those that have been granted the ability to simply declare entry into the Royal Rumble by management are free to do so. Those that haven't must qualify. I don't write the rules, I just enforce them. Easy. I mean, that is logical. And that's great. As soon as I saw that explanation, I went, oh, that makes sense. The thing that frustrated me when he made that explanation was, why couldn't anyone say that on TV for the last 2-3 weeks? Why did it take for everyone on social media to say, what is with this? That doesn't make any sense. It took for people to say there's no logic there, and then they found it. Why not actually use a bit of forethought and find some logic there? I mean, it's a really logical explanation, and it works. I just wish they had that logic on TV. It's so frustrating, but I like the explanation. I think it's great. Raw viewership, some news as well. And obviously the Raw viewership isn't high up because the ratings aren't as down this week. I know that's what some people will say, but Monday Night Raw viewership actually rose this past week with the Asuka Alexa Bliss main event, which was shocking to me because I thought the show was terrible. Apart from the Randy Orton, Alexa Bliss and Asuka stuff, I thought the show was just awful. Nothing of substance on it, but it did rise in the ratings slightly. Monday's live episode of Raw, featuring Alexa Bliss versus Raw Women's Champion and Women's Tag Team Champion Asuka in the main event, drew an average of 1.855 million live viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Showbuzz Daily. This is up from last week's 1.819 million live viewers on the USA Network. For this week's show, the first hour drew 1.991 million viewers. Last week's hour one was 2.024, so it's actually down. The second hour drew 1.875 million viewers. Last week's was at 1.802, so that's up. And the final hour drew 1.697 million viewers. Last week was 1.632 million. So the second and third hours actually rose, whilst the first hour actually dropped, which is surprising. But I think what has got people talking about this week's Raw viewership is that it did rise, which people are saying, considering the show, not bad. But this was the first edition of Raw where there was no football competition. Of course, last Monday's edition of Raw was dominated by the College Football Championship game. That was stiff competition, and the NFL regular season has wrapped the week before that. So people will say, well, it rose. You would probably expect that, considering there was no competition. Would you have expected more? I don't know. It will certainly be interesting to see going forward now in this stretch to the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania season if Raw viewership is going to increase, because it usually does now as we head into WrestleMania season, but especially because there's no weekly football competition. If it doesn't, if it continues to go down or stay the same, that is a concern, because that tells me that that football audience is not a WWE audience. They don't care. It's not a case of, oh, we lost all of these viewers to watch the football. We never had them in the first place. That would be the concern there. So we'll have to wait and see. That's going to be certainly interesting over the course of the next couple of weeks. And finally, we have some more stuff announced for AEW next week, because on last night's edition of Dynamite, a number of matches were announced for next week's show, most notably AEW World Tag Team Champions, the Young Bucks, teaming with the Impact World Tag Team Champions, the Good Brothers, Doc Gallows and Kyle Anderson, against members of the Dark Order, Evil Uno, Stu Grayson, John Silver and Alex Reynolds. Also, it's been announced that Cody Rhodes is finally set to respond to Shaq's comments from his appearance last month. The last time we saw the NBA Hall of Famer, he had some word for Cody Rhodes' wife Brandy and ended up getting a drink of water thrown on him in the process. Now, Shaq's associate Jade Cargill made her presence known on Dynamite last night as she caused a distraction during Cody Rhodes' match against Peter Avalon. Cody ended up overcoming and winning the match via submission. So it looks to me like we're still going to get this Cody Rhodes Shaq match, which TNT and AEW desperately wants. Obviously, the original plan was to have Cody and Brandy Rhodes versus Shaq and Jade Cargill. I think the reason why it's taken so long to get a response is because they've been scrambling to think, look, can Shaq actually do a singles match? But it looks like that's what we're going to get, unless, of course, they still go with the mixed tag with Shaq and Jade Cargill, and they just get Cody Rhodes another tag team partner. Wouldn't rule that out as well, so that's interesting. As far as the tag team match, how surreal is that? AEW World Tag Team Champions teaming up with Impact Tag Team Champions. The Biz Clears is still dominating across both promotions. You love to see it. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the news stories that we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really just help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to WrestleNews 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.